The U.S. has taken over Venezuela and captured their president, Nicolás Maduro. Super big news coming out this weekend, and we gotta talk about it. In this video, we're gonna talk about why the U.S. attacked Venezuela, the strategy behind it. We're gonna talk about what it means for the global economy, talking about the oil market, this trade war between the U.S. and China, and also what it means for assets like Bitcoin, gold, stocks, and more. So you're gonna wanna stick around. Before we get started, please make sure to like the video and subscribe to the YouTube. Really appreciate your support. I'm also going to put a QR code down below for a Bitcoin tip. So if you want to support the channel, feel free to leave me a little tip. Now let's get into it. On January 3rd, the United States attacked Venezuela in what people are calling Operation Absolute Resolve. The U.S. military did airstrikes in Caracas, the capital of Venezuela, and the U.S. captured the president, Nicolás Maduro, and his wife. President Trump announced that the United States will be temporarily running the country until they have a smooth transition of power. So in the meantime, it's looking like the vice president in Caracas, Delcy Rodriguez, is going to be the interim president, and the U.S. is kind of going to be orchestrating this transition to new leadership. Maduro has been flown to New York and is being charged with narco-terrorism, drug trafficking, and corruption. He has pled not guilty to all three charges, but it seems like he might be guilty for at least a couple of these. This Nicolás Maduro guy does not seem like a great man. Whether you agree with Trump going into Venezuela and capturing him or not, it seems like the Venezuelan people are very happy about his exit. I've seen a lot of videos of people celebrating in the streets, and it seems like this was a leader that was corrupt, authoritarian, and a little bit too powerful, steering the country in the wrong direction. One of the ways that he was steering the country in the wrong direction was with their economy. Their economy seriously contracted under Nicolás Maduro's leadership. Under Maduro, Venezuela's GDP contracted 70 to 80% from 2013 through 2025 when he was captured. Back in 2013, their nominal GDP was between 330 and 370 billion measured in US dollars, and in 2025 their nominal GDP was only 80 billion to 110 billion. So they saw a huge fall off in production with Maduro as their leader, and this is in big part due to the decline of their oil industry. And with the decline of their oil industry and the decline in production, we actually saw that Venezuela's currency, the bolivar, hyperinflated back in 2018. Oil has been Venezuela's main product for a long time. Back in 2013, when Maduro stepped into office, oil revenue funded 90% of their government revenue. But after he stepped into office, we saw that oil production fell off a cliff. Back in 2013, Venezuela was producing 2.5 million barrels per day, and by 2019 that had dropped all the way down to 400,000 barrels per day. And with this decline in government revenue and a big increase in government spending, this led to super wide fiscal deficits. We all know that when countries accumulate a lot of debt and there isn't a ton of demand for their currency, this can lead to hyperinflation. So as we saw their deficits get worse and people began to lose trust in the bolivar, people started to sell out of the bolivar and move into dollars, and this accelerated this hyperinflation that we saw. In 2018, the hyperinflation was between 130,000% and 1,700,000% according to estimates. So their economy and their currency have collapsed under Maduro's leadership. However, there is hope that with new leadership, this economy can be revived. And one place we're seeing this is with Venezuela's stock market. If we look at a little visual here, this shows how much Venezuela's stock market has gone up since the capture of Nicolás Maduro. It's up 73%, and this is expressing enthusiasm. And one of the main reasons why there is so much enthusiasm is because Venezuela is very rich in natural resources. They do have a lot of oil. They do have a lot of these important metals like gold, aluminum, iron. They also may have a lot of untapped deposits of rare earth minerals, which is something that every country wants. So if Venezuela can revive their oil industry, if these US companies can come in and rebuild the infrastructure and get production back up to levels that we saw back in the 90s or even back in 2013, and if they can tap into their gold deposits, into iron, aluminum, and rare earth minerals, there is hope that this economy can really start to flourish. Now let's talk about oil, because a lot of people are speculating that this is what this US takeover is all about, and I definitely think that oil has something to do with it. Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world, estimated at around 300 billion barrels, and those 300 billion barrels at current prices are worth around $17 trillion. So Venezuela has a lot of oil, and people think that the US wants access to this oil for obvious reasons, right? Having all that oil gives you a lot of power. And we actually saw that just yesterday, Trump announced that Venezuela is turning over 30 to 50 million barrels of oil to the US. Now, the US technically is not supposed to just go into other countries and take their natural resources. That is against international law. But Trump did announce that he wants to allow these US companies to re-enter Venezuela and kind of revive their oil industry, because their oil industry has really been tanking since 2007 when it was nationalized. If you're not familiar with Venezuela's oil industry, back in 2007, it was nationalized by the government, and they required that the state oil organization, Petróleos de Venezuela, had to be the majority stakeholder in all oil ventures in the country. So this was not attractive to US oil companies, and it pushed many of these US oil companies out because they didn't want to have minority control, right? And really, by nationalizing the oil industry, this led to production falling off a cliff. The only US company who stayed in Venezuela and kept a minority stake in a couple of projects was Chevron. So if more of these US oil companies like ExxonMobil are able to enter into Venezuela, and these US companies are able to have more control, more power, and there's more free market competition, there's a belief that this could revive the oil industry and boost production back up. After Trump made the announcement that he wants to see US oil companies more invested in Venezuela, we saw the stocks for US oil companies ripping higher. If we take a look at a little chart of Chevron stock performance over the past 5 days, you can see at the beginning of the week, Chevron stock started shooting up higher, and this makes sense, right? If these oil companies are able to become more invested in Venezuela and get access to all this oil in one of the most oil-rich countries in the world, that is going to be great for their business. While access to Venezuela's oil industry is a great perk of this US takeover, it may not be the main reason here, and I need to give a shout out to the Jack Mallers show, which did a great job of breaking down some of these different reasons for why the US went into Venezuela. You should check out his most recent episode on YouTube if you haven't already. But a main reason that he talked about on there is national security. Venezuela is a location where a lot of these US adversaries are operating. Adversaries like China, Russia, and Iran. And the US does not want these enemies to be hanging out down in South America, right? They don't like that. China is the largest importer of oil from Venezuela. They make up around 70 to 85% of Venezuela's oil exports. China's oil imports from Venezuela only make up around 4 to 5% of their total oil imports. So this isn't going to have a huge impact on them, but it's definitely still a power move from the United States. It gives the US more access to this oil, to this energy, and it disrupts China's presence in South America. If we look at Russia, Russia's invested in oil ventures in Venezuela, and they also have military ties with the country, which is not something that the US wants. The US does not want Russia hanging out there and talking about attacks in South America. So I understand why the US wanted to head down there and keep an eye on things, right? They don't want these enemies in Russia, China, and Iran to be hanging out in South America and strategizing against the United States. Another reason why the US has interest in Venezuela are these rare earth minerals. We know that these rare earth minerals are really critical for production in everything. Things like electronics, defense, vehicles, and solar. And the thing about the global macroeconomic picture is China has all the access to these rare earth minerals, and this gives them a lot of power over the United States. We can go ahead and take a look at a little visual here which breaks down the largest producers of rare earth minerals. And as you can see, China dominates this production, and this is something that the United States can't have. If the United States wants to boost production in the country, if we want to be a powerhouse in production like we were in the 20th century, then we need access to these. And it's believed that Venezuela may have untapped rare earth minerals that the US could access. So this is the same reason why the US wants to go into Greenland. The US is trying to change the world order. They're tired of being the world consumer. They want to be the world producer, but in order to do that, they need to get access to these rare earth minerals, and they may not get them from China, since the US and China are in a bit of a trade war, and China doesn't want the US to become the world producer. They're the world producer, right? They don't want the US to flip the script and try to change the world order. Now let's talk about some of the ripple effects of this US takeover. If the US is able to access this oil in Venezuela and the oil industry, this is going to benefit the US economy. It's going to lead to lower energy prices, which are going to benefit businesses, and this should boost the stock market. It's also going to help the US fight against inflation. We know that we've seen the money supply increase drastically over the past couple of years, but if we're able to have lower energy costs, this should lead to lower prices and help combat these rising prices, especially as we see the Federal Reserve and the government move into this cycle of monetary expansion that they just started. We could also see retaliation from US adversaries like China, who are not happy about this takeover. China could ramp up their tariffs, they could increase export controls on rare earth minerals and other things, especially if the US is starting to access rare earth minerals in Venezuela. And they could also start dumping US treasuries, right? They could do a financial attack and attack the US debt market, which is looking pretty vulnerable. They could also expand their presence in other parts of South America, countries like Argentina, Brazil, or Bolivia. So I don't think that China's happy about this, and I do think that they are going to look to retaliate in one way or another. Also, with this growing conflict, with the conflict between the United States and China growing, I think that this could benefit safe haven assets, things like gold, silver, and Bitcoin, as there's just more uncertainty out there. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about is this rumor of Venezuela's secret Bitcoin reserve of 600,000 Bitcoin. I've been on X over the past couple of days, and people have really been speculating that Venezuela has this large stockpile of Bitcoin, 600,000 Bitcoin. And to be honest with you, I feel like this is just a rumor. I find it hard to believe that we just now be finding out that Venezuela is one of the largest holders of Bitcoin. I haven't really seen any direct evidence that this is true, but people think that Venezuela has been selling gold for Bitcoin. We know that Venezuela has very large gold reserves, and that Venezuela has been selling oil for Tether to avoid sanctions and then converting that Tether into Bitcoin. So who knows? Maybe it's true. I doubt it, but rumor or not, this could really speed up this nation state Bitcoin accumulation race, right? If other countries are hearing that some other countries may have large stockpiles of Bitcoin and they don't have that much, it may incentivize them to start buying up more. And if nation states start buying up more Bitcoin, it could lead to the supply running out pretty fast. That's going to wrap it up for this one, guys. This US takeover of Venezuela is going to have implications for the energy markets, as well as the geopolitical positions of the United States and their adversaries. So we will just have to see what happens next. If you didn't like and subscribe, please make sure to do that now. Thanks for watching. I'll be back soon.